Welcome to Book 3 of Level 1, the I Totally Read These in School Club. Jane Eyre. Fun retelling of the classic novel by Charlotte Bronte. Love, mystery, and one sketchy mansion. Part 1. Miserable childhood at Gateshead. Meet Jane Eyre, our plucky protagonist. She's about 10 years old, an orphan living with her Aunt Reed at Gateshead Hall, where the vibes are straight up dreadful. Aunt Reed basically hates Jane's guts, and her spoiled cousins, Georgiana, Eliza, and the monstrous John Reed, treat her like a pest. So yeah, Jane's childhood is about as cozy as a haunted basement at midnight. One day, Jane's reading quietly in this window seat, trying to dodge John Reed, who's a real piece of work. Imagine a bratty influencer in Victorian breeches. He finds Jane, mocks her for reading his books, and literally throws one at her face. She fights back, respect. And guess what? She gets in trouble. Aunt Reed locks her in this creepy red room, where her uncle died ages ago. Jane's convinced his ghost might pop out any minute. Panic attack ensues. Eventually, the servants and Aunt Reed drag her out. Aunt Reed's like, "You're a wicked child," and Jane's had enough. She basically calls her Anne out, telling her how horrible she is. Aunt Reed, scandalized, decides to ship Jane off to Lowwood School for Girls, run by this super pious dude named Mr. Brocklehurst. He's all about humility, but ironically, he's living large while the school's students freeze and starve on watery porridge. So Jane's like, okay, maybe Lowwood will be a fresh start? She's not holding her breath, but anything's better than Aunt Reed. Before she leaves, an apothecary named Mr. Lloyd suggests Aunt Reed's got problems, so at least we have an adult with half a conscience noticing Jane's situation. But for the moment, Gateshead is out and Lowwood is in. Jane packs up her meager stuff, hoping for literally anything better than John Reed's abuse and Aunt Reed's soul-crushing negativity. The journey to Lowwood is bleak. It's winter, the roads are rough, and the school building is cold, gray, and unwelcoming. But Jane's determined to keep her chin up. She's read enough books to know that life can't be all gloom forever. She's also longing for genuine friendship, some sense of belonging. And that's how Jane Eyre, orphan extraordinaire, escapes one toxic environment only to land in another that's marginally better, but still a dumpster fire. The highlight of her time at Gateshead? Realizing she's not powerless. Her outburst at Aunt Reed was the first spark of independence. Next stop, Lowwood, where Jane will face more drama, meet some real ones, and keep leveling up her resilience. Stay tuned. Part 2. Lowwood School Blues. Now Jane's at Lowwood School, which is basically a charity institution for orphan girls. It's run by the infamous Mr. Brocklehurst, the tight-fisted hypocrite who's all like, no one needs more than one meal a day, and we must mortify the flesh to please God. Meanwhile, he and his family prance around in velvet capes. So, yeah, major double standard vibes. The conditions at Lowwood are savage. Minimal food, imagine burnt porridge or bread scraps, super strict discipline, freezing dorms, and not enough clothing. The older girls do manual chores, and if you break a minor rule, you're publicly humiliated, like getting your hair chopped off because it's vain. Jane's about to lose it, except she meets an angel on earth. Helen Burns, a brilliant, gentle girl who's basically an advanced level saint. Helen's all about patience, acceptance, and turning the other cheek. Jane's like, I want to fight back though. But she admires Helen's calm faith. Despite the misery, Jane thrives academically. She's smart, curious, and the teachers, like Miss Temple, see her potential. Miss Temple is a beacon of kindness in this grim place, trying to sneak in extra bread or ensure the girls get better treatment. She even publicly clears Jane's name when Aunt Reed's scurrilous remarks about Jane being a liar resurface. Miss Temple's basically, Jane's a sweet, honest kid. Let's not ruin her life with gossip, okay? Jane feels vindicated. But tragedy strikes. A typhus outbreak hits Lowwood, partly because the living conditions are so vile. Many students fall sick, some die. Helen Burns is one of them. She contracts consumption, tuberculosis, and in a heartbreaking scene, she passes away in Jane's arms. This wrecks Jane but also cements her worldview. Life's short, cruel, and you gotta cling to whatever kindness you find. The scandal of the typhus outbreak forces the school's board of directors to intervene. Brocklehurst is demoted. Conditions improve drastically, and Lowwood becomes somewhat bearable. Jane remains there for 6 more years as a student, and then 2 years as a teacher. She's grown from a trembling kid into a capable young adult, though she's itching for a new chapter. At around 18, Jane's like, I need a change. Miss Temple, her mentor, gets married and leaves. That's the final push. So Jane puts out an ad for a governess position, something middle-class women can do if they want financial independence. She gets a response from someone at a mysterious place called Thornfield Hall, offering a job teaching a little French girl. Jane's hype. She's ready for new horizons, away from the institutional gloom of Lowwood. She wants to see the world, or at least more of Yorkshire, and maybe find a place where she truly belongs. That's how Jane goes from half-starved orphan to a teacher with genuine skills and independence. Next stop, Thornfield Hall, weird secrets included at no extra charge. Buckle up, because the story's about to get gothic and romantic in equal measure. Part 3. Thornfield Hall, calm before the crazy. Jane travels to Thornfield Hall, expecting some dusty old mansion, but the vibe is actually pretty homey. She meets Mrs. Fairfax, the sweet housekeeper who runs the place. Mrs. Fairfax clarifies that the house belongs to Mr. Edward Rochester, but he's often away on business. Jane's job is to govern Adele Varens, a lively French kid who might be Mr. Rochester's ward. The details are fuzzy, and no one's super clear on her backstory. At first, Thornfield is low-key. Jane loves her new freedom, a comfortable room, decent meals, a salary. She teaches Adele basic stuff like English grammar, piano, and fancy lady skills. They get along well enough. Mrs. Fairfax is pleasant. Everything's too normal, honestly. But once in a while, Jane hears these eerie laughs echoing in the halls. Mrs. Fairfax is like, that's just Grace Poole, a seamstress with a weird sense of humor, but the noise is spookier than any comedic cackle. Jane's suspicious. Enter Rochester. One late afternoon, Jane's on an errand and helps a random stranger who fell off his horse on an icy road. Turns out that was Mr. Rochester himself. Oops. He arrives at Thornfield a bit later, all sarcastic and moody, an older guy with rugged features but strong charisma. He's not your typical handsome Prince Charming, more like a Byronic hero with baggage. Rochester's interactions with Jane are electric. He teases her, calls her odd, complains about his life, but he's impressed by her honesty. He's bored with the usual fake compliments from society ladies. Jane, no filter, intrigues him. They have late-night convos by the fire, discussing everything from art to morality. Jane's never experienced this level of mental connection. She's also feeling some fluttery emotions, but Rochester's hot and cold vibe confuses her. Things get freaky one night. Jane saves Rochester from a fiery bedroom. She hears that spooky laugh again, runs in, finds Rochester's bed curtains in flames. She douses them with water, saves his life, but he insists, don't tell anyone. I'll handle it. Then the next day, he claims it was Grace Poole's accident. Jane's like, Grace Poole? She still works here. The pay for Grace is suspiciously high. Jane's gut says something bigger's going on, but no one's talking. Meanwhile, Rochester ditches Thornfield for a while, leaving Jane alone with her confusion. She wonders, does he like me? Why is he so moody? Who started that fire? She roams the third-floor corridor sometimes, hearing weird footsteps. The mansion's serene by day, spooky by night, a perfect setting for romantic suspense. Jane's about to learn that her boss's dark secrets will challenge her integrity, her heart, and her sense of self. Part 4. Jealousy, parties, and the return of Rochester. Rochester eventually returns, but not alone. He brings a crew of aristocratic guests for a fancy house party. Among them is the glamorous Blanche Ingram, rumored to be Rochester's potential fiancée. She's tall, beautiful, with major attitude. Jane is forced to observe their flirtation from the sidelines, feeling like a humble governess who doesn't belong. Blanche and her mother talk smack about governesses in front of Jane, calling them tiresome and low. Rochester doesn't defend Jane openly, and it crushes her. She scolds herself for harboring romantic feelings like, He's way above me. I'm poor, plain, and invisible to him. But deep down, she can't squash her affection. Meanwhile, more drama arrives in the form of a strange guest named Mr. Mason from the West Indies. Rochester freaks out when he sees him, warning Jane to keep an eye out for trouble. Later that night, chaos ensues. Mason is mysteriously attacked in the middle of the night. Jane helps Rochester patch him up before calling for a doctor. They hush it all up to avoid scandal. Again, Rochester says it's Grace Poole. Jane's like, no way. The math is not adding up. Another twist. A fortune teller shows up at Thornfield to read the ladies' fortunes. Blanche Ingram is disappointed by her prophecy, apparently. When Jane's turn comes, the fortune teller says weirdly personal stuff about Jane's feelings for Rochester. Surprise! The fortune teller is actually Rochester in disguise. This man's theatrical. He was testing Blanche's sincerity. Spoiler, she's a gold digger, and gauging Jane's heart. Jane is flustered but not super angry. She's used to Rochester's eccentric ways. However, soon after, Aunt Reed falls ill. Jane gets summoned back to Gateshead. She's not thrilled but decides to do her duty. She finds Aunt Reed near death, consumed by bitterness, even refusing Jane's genuine forgiveness. Aunt Reed confesses she once got a letter from Jane's uncle, John Eyre, who wanted to adopt Jane and leave her an inheritance. Aunt Reed basically withheld the letter out of spite. Jane's like, wow, you really hate me that much? Aunt Reed dies unrepentant, leaving Jane with complicated feelings, sadness, pity, but also relief. After the funeral, Jane returns to Thornfield. She expects Rochester to be engaged to Blanche by now, but guess what? The guests are gone, and no wedding was announced. Rochester seems more intense than ever, hinting that big changes are coming. Jane's confused but can't help feeling hopeful. The attic mysteries remain unsolved, but her bond with Rochester grows stronger. Everything's building toward a major romantic showdown, and maybe some catastrophic revelation that'll rock Jane's world. Part 5. The Proposal and the Shocking Secret. Back at Thornfield, Rochester starts acting super dramatic around Jane. One evening in the garden, he drops a bomb. I'm not marrying Blanche. I was messing with your head to see if you were jealous. Jane's both offended and relieved. Then he declares his love for her, saying she's his equal in spirit. In a whirlwind, he proposes. Jane's mind is blown. She's like, wait, I'm a lowly governess, you're my boss, is this real? But her heart says yes. They share a passionate, thunderstormy kiss, and it's official. Jane Eyre is engaged to Mr. Rochester. Wedding prep is intense. Rochester spoils her with fancy dresses and jewels, which Jane hates because she's all about modesty. Meanwhile, weird stuff keeps happening. Jane's wedding veil is ripped by some spectral figure in her room at night. Rochester claims it's Grace Poole again. Jane feels major dread. The house staff is hush-hush. Still, the wedding day arrives. At the altar, they're about to say, I do, when a lawyer pipes up, stop. This marriage is invalid because Mr. Rochester already has a wife. Record scratch. Everyone's stunned. Then Mr. Mason steps forward confirming it. Rochester's wife is Bertha Mason, Mason's sister, locked away in Thornfield's attic because she's violently insane. The attorney explains that Rochester married her years ago in Jamaica, not knowing mental illness ran in her family. Bertha eventually lost it, and Rochester basically stashed her at Thornfield, employing Grace Poole as her caretaker. Jane is shattered. Rochester drags everyone to the attic to see the truth. Bertha, raging and savage, tries to attack them. She's the one who started the bedroom fires and attacked Mason. Jane's stunned and heartbroken. Rochester pleads his case, saying he was tricked into the marriage, that Bertha's existence ruined his life. He claims his love for Jane is pure, and he's not morally married. But legally, he's stuck. He begs Jane to stay with him anyway, as his mistress if not his wife. Now Jane faces the ultimate moral crisis. She loves Rochester deeply, but the law and her own conscience says he's not free to remarry. Torn between passion and principle, Jane chooses principle. She sneaks out at dawn with no money, no plan, running away from Thornfield, her dream, and her beloved Mr. R. She's devastated but determined not to become the side chick in an immoral arrangement. And so the perfect romance shatters. Jane, alone and penniless, must find a new path. The secrets of Thornfield are out. The attic was no rumor. There really was a mad wife locked away. Rochester's heartbreak is massive, but so is Jane's. Will they ever find a way back? Or is Jane doomed to wander the moors forever? Stay tuned. Part 6. Wandering and New Connections. The Rivers Siblings. Jane flees Thornfield in the middle of the night, hops a coach, and ends up in some random moorland region. She quickly runs out of money, nearly starves, and sleeps outdoors like a Victorian homeless situation. She begs for food from strangers who slam doors in her face. Super rough times. Eventually, half dead from exhaustion, she collapses at the door of a modest home belonging to the Rivers siblings, St. John, pronounced St. Jean, Diana, and Mary Rivers. They see she's in dire straits, take her in, and nurse her back to health. Jane, using a fake name Jane Elliott, hides her past to avoid scandal. Over time, Jane becomes friends with Diana and Mary, who are kind, well-educated, but not wealthy. Their brother, St. John, is a stern, intense clergyman with big missionary ambitions. He's all about self-denial, wanting to go to India to spread the gospel. Jane appreciates his help but feels uneasy about his cold, driven personality. She's missing Rochester fiercely but tries to bury that heartbreak. Thanks to St. John's connections, Jane lands a job as a teacher at a small charity school for village girls. She's contentious, though it's not glamorous. She's living in a cottage on the school grounds, forging an independent life again. But her heart is basically on pause. She sometimes hears imaginary voices calling her name at night, maybe Rochester's? She dismisses it as longing. Plot twist. One day, St. John discovers Jane's real identity. Why? He inherits some paperwork referencing her uncle, John Eyre, who died and left a fortune of £20,000 to Jane Eyre. That's right, the same uncle Aunt Reed tried to sabotage. Jane is now mega rich, and it turns out she's cousins with the Rivers siblings. Her father's brother was also the Rivers' mother's brother. Hashtag family ties. Jane's pumped. She splits the inheritance among them, giving each sibling £5,000. The four cousins can now live comfortably, no more penny pinching. But St. John has other ideas for Jane. He proposes they marry and go to India as missionaries. He sees Jane's strong will and moral fortitude as perfect for missionary work. He's all, God wants us to do this. Let's be holy partners. Jane's like, I respect your passion, but I don't love you romantically. Also, a mission in India might kill me physically and spiritually. St. John basically tries to guilt-trip her, saying it's her duty. Jane feels torn. He's a good man, but super controlling. She knows marrying him would be stifling. One night, as she's almost caving under his pressure, she hears a distant cry. Jane. 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 She swears it's Rochester's voice. This supernatural moment clarifies everything. She can't marry St. John. She needs to find Rochester, see if he's okay, see if there's any chance for them. So she declines St. John's marriage proposal and decides to return to Thornfield, not sure what she'll find there. Part 7. Return to Thornfield and Tragic Discovery. Jane rushes back to Thornfield Hall, heart pounding, bracing for who knows what. Upon arrival, she finds it burned to the ground, a total ruin, blackened walls, collapsed roof. She's like, OMG, what happened? She tracks down a local innkeeper to get the tea. Turns out Bertha, Rochester's insane wife, set the place on fire after Jane left. She climbed onto the roof, basically suicidal, and in a dramatic moment, she jumped or fell to her death. Rochester tried to rescue her but was severely injured. He lost a hand, and he's now blind in both eyes. Well, mostly blind with partial sight in one. He's living as a recluse at a smaller estate called Ferndene. Jane's devastated by the tragedy, but also determined. She heads to Ferndene, where she sees Rochester, now physically broken, moody as ever, living with just a couple of old servants. He's depressed, believing Jane is gone forever. When she walks in, he thinks he's hallucinating. She assures him she's real, and the reunion is both emotional and awkward. Rochester can't see her, but he can hear her voice, feel her presence. He's overwhelmed with gratitude. Jane and Rochester talk it out. She explains what happened with the Rivers family, her inheritance, and how she felt mysteriously called back to him. He confesses he prayed for a miracle, that she might return. Now that Bertha is gone, Rochester is free to remarry, and Jane is morally free to accept. No more bigamy drama. Their love overcame insane obstacles, literally. Rochester is humble now. No more manipulative games. Jane's an independently wealthy woman, so she's not reliant on him financially. The power dynamic is more equal. He proposes again, genuinely. Jane's like, heck yes, but in a more Victorian polite sense. She's not deterred by his injuries. In fact, she's even more devoted because she sees how he suffered. They settle in at Ferndean, living quietly. Over time, Rochester recovers partial sight in one eye, enough to see his firstborn child when it arrives. Jane's final note is that they've been married for years, extremely happy, and the gloom of the past is behind them. Part 8. Domestic bliss and growth. So, yep, Jane and Rochester tie the knot. No cathedral wedding with society's blessings, but a private, heartfelt ceremony. They're all about that quiet life at Ferndean, away from gossip. Adele, Rochester's ward, attends a better school, funded by Jane, who's got that inheritance now, and grows into a lovely young woman. She visits them on holidays. Rochester, once arrogant and brooding, mellows out. Blindness forced him to rely on others, and that humility fits well with Jane's love. He gradually recovers some vision, enough to see shapes and eventually witness the birth of their son. Jane is thrilled to share parenthood with him. They basically become the ultimate #relationship goals in a weird, Gothic Victorian sense. As for the extended fam, Diana and Mary Rivers are happily married to decent men, living fulfilling lives. They maintain close ties with Jane. St. John is still the intense missionary type. He goes to India, writing letters that indicate he's working himself to the bone. Jane respects him but is low-key relieved she didn't marry him. She sends him moral support but no regrets. Jane reflects on her journey. She went from oppressed orphan to independent woman with property, real love, and self-respect. The entire saga taught her that moral conviction sometimes means walking away from everything you desire if it's not right. She also sees that real love can't exist without honesty and equality. Rochester had to be brought low, literally losing his house, hand, and sight, for them to meet on equal ground. It's kind of a cosmic justice arc. In her final lines in the novel's actual text, she addresses St. John's updates from India, but mostly she's praising the domestic contentment she found. The moral? True love thrives when you keep your dignity and do not compromise your principles. You can't build a future on secrets in the attic. Part 9. Why Jane Eyre still slaps. So that's the plot, but let's quickly summarize why Jane Eyre is still iconic. Jane's agency. She's not your typical 19th century damsel. She knows her worth. When Rochester tries to trap her in a morally shady situation, she says nope, even though it hurts like crazy. Her self-respect is non-negotiable. Moral versus emotional conflict. Jane's huge decision to leave Rochester after the botched wedding is the novel's core. She's in love, but she won't break her conscience. That tension between passion and principle is timeless. Gothic mystery, the creepy laughs in the attic, the nighttime fires, the big reveal of a secret mad wife. It's basically the blueprint for modern Gothic romance. Proto-feminist vibes. Jane's all about independence, spiritual equality, and not letting social status define her. She's a governess who refuses to be seen as inferior. That's huge for the 1840s. Romantic hero revisited. Rochester is complicated, flawed, not classically handsome, yet deeply compelling. Their chemistry is electric, based on intellect and spirit, not superficial looks. Redemption arc. Rochester's downfall and Bertha's tragic end highlight that deception and forced captivity are not the way. The only way forward is truth and free will. Class and gender. The novel comments on how women of limited means had to hustle for independence. Jane's professional life as a governess is a major statement on self-reliance. In short, Jane Eyre is the OG tale of a smart, determined woman forging her own path in a society that'd rather see her docile and invisible. She navigates toxic relatives, hypocritical schoolmasters, a moody fiancé with a colossal skeleton in the closet, and the moral heartbreak of leaving her love. Yet she emerges triumphant, with both personal and marital fulfillment. The end. Jane and Rochester are living their best happily ever after in that forest cottage, possibly crocheting or reading poetry by the fireside while raising their kiddos. Sure, it's a little 19th century ideal, but the emotional journey is timeless. And that's why Jane Eyre remains a must-read for anyone who loves strong heroines, gothic vibes, and a good dash of romantic drama with moral backbone. You just mastered Jane Eyre like a literary adventurer climbing every gothic peak. Go ahead, light the victory candles. You've earned it. Up next in Level 1, Book 4, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Roll with Pip as he gets ghosted, roasted, and glowed up in a world of epic love triangles and wild fortunes. Dickens' drama just hits different.
Also, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay in the loop for all our epic content. And guess what? A new fun retelling audiobook drops every single weekday.